All right, we made it to the end, and what a finale. Let's talk about Disclaimer episode 7. Hi everyone, it's David Stark from Watcher Pass. I'm here to talk to you about Disclaimer episode 7. 7, Roman 7, VII, whatever you want to call it. It is the 7th episode in the Disclaimer miniseries. It's coming to Apple TV Plus on November 8th, 2024. This is the finale. This concludes this roller coaster whirlwind of events that we have been following and gives some closure and some additional perspective to everything that we've learned. So, should you watch this? Should you take this journey? Yes, my hot take is I definitely think you should watch this. This was a fantastic episode. It was a powerful conclusion to what has been, I think, one of the most intense and kind of like well acted, dramatic Apple TV Plus series that I've seen. I haven't seen a lot of Apple TV Plus series. I've seen a good number, but this one was way up there. The acting, the characters, the twists, everything was just so well done. It was beautifully put together, and this finale kind of like puts a cap on it. So definitely think you should check it out. If you haven't seen Disclaimer, go back, start it, get through it. It is a very, very good miniseries. So all that being said, I'm going to tell you about the episode, a few things I like, a few things I didn't like, and then really quickly go into a recap. So as you can imagine, there will be spoilers in the recap section. If you don't know what happens in this episode, you might not. There are some pretty big surprises, some very, very big surprises, some big reveals. I would turn it off when they get to the recap section. Before that, though, I'll keep it vague. I'll keep it spoiler free, and I'll let you know when I get to those spoilers. So episode 7 picks up right where episode 6 left off. Remember, in episode 6, Catherine broke into Stephen's house with a knife, but then said she just wanted to tell her truth. They sat down for some tea. Stephen drugged her tea, and that was the end. Catherine's last words, I think, were like, "I want to tell my story," or something along those lines. Well, in this episode, we hear her story. We hear what happened to her in Italy, what happened between her and Joinathan. And it is very different from what we heard before and leads to a series of events throughout this episode. So, things I liked about this episode. The first, I love the cast. I still love the cast. The cast is fantastic. But in this episode, we get to see a very different side of young Joinathan and young Catherine, one that's a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more intense than we are used to. And also, we get to see Cate Blanchett doing just a masterclass in acting. Like, when she's telling her story, it is very emotional, and she just like completely transforms during it. The second thing I love the sound. There's a lot of really great uses of sound in this episode. There's little sounds like the kind of familiar clicking of Steven's refrigerator that we've seen throughout. Like that kind of constant humming is an interesting thing that we hear that like grounds us. There's a lot of this little like background noises that make this feel very lived in, like barking dogs, the clicking of the teacup. They use sound really amazingly. And also during the like retelling of Catherine's story, there's no sound, which is fascinating. Like it's a very interesting way to tell it. It's your dramatic music and that constant clicking of that refrigerator to let you know where you are physically, and it is just a great way to do it. The third thing I love the perspective still. Again, we get a different view of what happened between Catherine and Joinathan, something that we hadn't seen before, and it changes a lot of what has happened in this series. The fourth thing I loved, music, fantastic music, especially during the retelling, because that's one of the only things we have. We have really beautiful, deep, I don't know, Baroque kind of music, and that shows how serious this is and also helps to like give you a lot more emotion. The fifth thing I loved. I love the tension. There are some very tense moments here as we try to figure out what is going to happen to all these characters, and they are definitely going to keep you on edge, definitely make you wonder what will happen next. Last thing I did love the ending. I thought the ending was good. I thought the ending kind of pulled everything together, all the things that we've heard, all the things that we've seen. It is a good ending that gets all the characters involved and kind of gives you a powerful end to this miniseries. So, all that being said, things I didn't love as much. Maybe like one thing, maybe the ultimate ending, which I'm not going to go into here, but I'll go into in the recap. Just a few things about the ending and the story that I didn't really understand, but I don't know. Maybe you can enlighten me. But in any event, I still think this is a fantastic series. I think this is one of the best series I've seen on Apple TV Plus, and it is definitely something you should watch. So check out Disclaimer, check out the whole series, and make sure to watch episode 7 when it comes to Apple TV Plus on November 8th, 2024. If you do watch it, let me know what you think. Let me know what you like and didn't like. I'd love to hear it. I'm gonna really quickly go into a recap right now. So if you don't want to happen to this episode, I would turn it off now because there will be spoilers. So this episode, the meat of this episode really is Catherine's story, and she's telling her story to Stephen. She tells it in a little bit of an out of order way. I'm just going to tell it chronologically, I guess, or chronologically in the way that it happened to make it easier to kind of like follow. But essentially, she continues her story from what she said earlier. Remember, in episode 6, she was talking about how She went to the beach. She was upset that Robert left, but by the end of the day, she was happy. She spent time with Nicholas. She went down to get a glass of wine. Joinathan was there. He hit on her, and she kind of like took his advances, kind of like internally, and went up to her room to just kind of like live in the moment. So now she goes back up to her room and she's happy. She's happy with Nicholas. She's drinking her wine. She's enjoying the time. But then I guess when she went in, she left her key in the lock. She wasn't thinking about it. She unlocked the door, went in, closed it. Her key was still in the lock. Well, this allowed Joinathan to come up in her room with a knife, and he's like threatening her. And this is all fascinating because this entire interaction, you hear Catherine telling the story, but there's no dialogue. It's the interaction between them in the past has no sound, just Catherine telling the story, the click of that refrigerator, and some dramatic music. So Joinathan came at her with a knife. He was like showing her how sharp it was. That's where that X cut in his forearm came from, that weird X cut that we had no idea where it was from. He cut that in his arm to show her how sharp it was. He hits her, and while he's like attacking her, Nicholas wakes up, and Catherine goes to comfort him, gets him back to sleep, tells him to be quiet. And I think, with Nicholas there, she's worried about what Joinathan is going to do. So she just kind of submits to him. And so Joinathan forces her to take pictures. He takes a bunch of pictures of her. All those scandalous pictures that we saw, those were Joinathan threatening her and making her pose for him so he could take these pictures. Now, during the course of these pictures, Joinathan gets very, very excited and proceeds to ejaculate like while he's taking these pictures. And Catherine thought, okay, that's it. He's like gotten his pleasure. He's gotten these pictures, so maybe he's gonna go now. And so she says, "Can you please go now?" Well, apparently this upset Joinathan. He gets angry at this, and so then he proceeds to rape her multiple times over 3.5 hours. It is a long, horrible ordeal for Catherine. She is, stuck there. She's worried about Nicholas. She's worried about this man with a knife. She doesn't know what's going to happen, and he is just brutalizing her over and over. Now, when he was done with all of this, he, I guess, proceeded to kiss her on the cheek and says, "Thank you, that was nice," which I think maybe shows his like tenuous grasp of reality, like maybe some underlying mental issues here, because he just did a horrible thing to her, like held her hostage, brutalized her, like violated her in many ways, and then he like kisses her and says thank you. So that is a strange thing that he did, and maybe shows that he like doesn't really have a good grasp of reality. But then he leaves. So the next day, Catherine couldn't sleep, obviously. Like after that ordeal, she couldn't sleep. She woke up exhausted and in pain. She went to the beach and she gave Nicholas that little like blow up raft dinghy. He was playing with it. She thought that it would distract him. She fell asleep because she was exhausted, and woke up when the wind picked up, the sand was hitting her, and she saw Nicholas out in the waves. Now, for some reason, Joinathan went to get him, and I'm not sure why. That was one thing I wasn't sure about. Like, why did Joinathan go to get Nicholas? Is this to show that like he's a complicated person? Maybe he has underlying good and bad aspects, like he's a horrible rapist, assaulter, but then also he wanted to save Nicholas. Does this show that maybe like he didn't have a grasp of reality? Like maybe he had affection for Catherine after that and like wanted to save her son? I don't know. I don't know why Joinathan went out to get Nicholas after what had happened. You would think that he would not want to stay around. You would think that he would leave. He would continue his like drifter lifestyle and go somewhere else. I don't know. That was the one thing I was like kind of unsure about. Like, why did he go out there, and why was he the first person to go out and try to save Nicholas? But he did. He did, and the rest of that story is the same. He went out there. Two other people went out there. They got Nicholas back. He was thrashing the waves. Catherine saw him. But in this time, before, when in the book, we think that Catherine doesn't save him because she doesn't want the affair to like come to light because Joinathan is going to like expose her. In this version, or Catherine's version, or the real version, Catherine doesn't want to say anything because she just wants him to die. Like she doesn't want to. She just wants to move on from this. She kind of like was wondering whether she should report it, what that process would be like, what the whole like investigation would be like, how much it would expose her and her family to this like court process. So when she sees him drowning, she thinks, well, this is a way to kind of like make it all go away. If he dies, then she can kind of like forget about this incident and try to move on with her life and not have to go through that whole ordeal, that whole process. She had actually saved evidence of the rape before, and she thinks if he dies, and she can just like not even involve her family, move on, and just like hopefully forget that it all happened. So that is why She didn't say anything. Eventually, they did see him. They went and got him, couldn't revive him. He was dead, and she just kind of like left. Now, unfortunately, it followed her back to London, both in the story from Nancy and also when she got back to London, she found out that she was pregnant and wasn't sure if it was Robert or Jonathan's. They really wanted another child, but I don't think she could handle it if it ended up being Jonathan's. That would have been, traumatizing for her, traumatizing for the family. So she ended up terminating it, and that is why Nicholas is an only son. So that is Catherine's story. That is what the truth is. That is what we are told is the truth. Very different from Nancy's story, where Nancy just kind of reconstructed it from going to the places, seeing those pictures, and things that she had thought. Well, Catherine filled in the gaps and explained some of the weird things about their whole encounter. So now, in the present day, after Catherine gets done telling her story, Stephen doesn't believe her, but it seems like he might. Like she says, he's like, "Why didn't you tell Nancy? Why didn't you bring this up?" And she's like, "You wanted me to tell your wife that the son that she just lost was a rapist and brutalized me? Like, what would that have accomplished?" And the only reason that she's bringing it up now, she's telling now, is that she wants Stephen to stop. Like, she doesn't want Stephen to continue to ruin her life. She doesn't want Stephen to continue to like hurt her family. So she's telling him the story so he'll stop. Now, Catherine did mention that she had that evidence, but once Jonathan died, she got rid of it because she didn't want to acknowledge it. She didn't want to have it be part of her life. She wanted to just move on and pretend like it didn't happen so that she could just continue on with her life. So after this exchange, Catherine realized there was something in the tea. I don't know why she didn't see it before. Like, it's very obvious he crushed up some pills, put them in her tea. The pills are still on the freaking counter. Like, Catherine should have noticed. I don't know. She didn't notice it. After they finish the story, she says, "What did you put in the tea?" And then she passes out. Now, Stephen then goes back to the hospital and he says he's going to put an end to all of this. Now, Stephen gets a taxi and goes. Catherine wakes up, I assume a few hours later. I mean, there were 6 sleeping pills. You would think she would wake up like days later, but only a couple hours later, she gets a taxi or she gets an Uber and she heads to the hospital. Now, Stephen's taxi must be the slowest taxi on the planet because I don't think he gets there much before her. Maybe like 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour. I'm not sure. Not a crazy amount before her, but while they're going to the hospital, Nicholas is unintubated and awake, and he's talking, he's recovering, he's awake and aware. He still needs time to recover, but he is at least kind of like getting there. Now, Robert goes to see Nicholas, but Nick doesn't want to hold his hand. Robert grabs his hand and Nick like pulls away. Well, Catherine's on her way to the hospital. She's texting, she's calling Robert, telling him like they're coming, he's dangerous, don't let him see our son. Robert ignores her. He's still mad at her for the whole ordeal, and so he just completely ignores. Now, when Stephen gets to the hospital, he goes to sit by Nicholas, and he looks like he is going to end this all. He has a syringe, he's about to put it into the IV, and then he hears Nicholas say, "Mom." And Nicholas wakes up and he tells Stephen, "I want to go home, please. I want to go home." And he grabs Stephen's hand. I don't know if it's instinctual, if he's, hallucinating, or if he's just trying to like find some connection now he's actually awake. So he wants, to have some human connection. And so Stephen holds Nicholas's hand for a little bit, and Nicholas keeps looking at him and saying, "I want to go, please." So Stephen then starts crying. I think he realizes that Nicholas is Catherine's son, that this isn't a fair exchange. I think he finally believes Catherine and whatnot. So Stephen then starts crying and walks away. Now Robert sees Stephen as he's leaving, and Stephen says he's sorry and tells him everything that Catherine said. So when Catherine gets there, after all this, she is sprinting. She's going to the hospital. She sees Stephen leaving the hospital, and she thinks he's done it. She thinks that he has like killed her son. And she says, "What have you done? What have you done to my son?" And he says, "I'm sorry." Very vague. Doesn't say like he's fine or anything. Stephen just says, "I'm sorry." Now Catherine thinks that this means Nicholas is dead, and she collapses. Now Robert goes to her and says, "Nick is fine," and he is so sorry. Robert is so sorry to Catherine, but Catherine, hears that Nicholas is awake and just leaves and runs to Nicholas. She goes, she holds his hand, she kind of like embraces him. Now Robert then gets mad at Stephen as Stephen's leaving and says like, "Why didn't you tell me?" Stephen says he didn't meet Catherine until today. He had this like image built up of her from the book, but he never actually met her until today. So he didn't know the truth until today. Now Robert then gets mad at him, like, "Why didn't you question it? How could you have not known? How could you have not known that your son could do this?" And Stephen then turns it around on him and says, "Why didn't you?" I mean, I think that this was a very ironic scene because, like, Robert is yelling at Stephen for not knowing his son's nature when Robert didn't know that his own son was a heroin addict and like sneaking out and doing drugs. So it's kind of an ironic statement for Robert to say, like, "How did you not know your son?" when he didn't even know his own son. So I think that was an intentional statement. I think that was an intentional point there. But Stephen turns it around and says, like, why didn't you question the story? Why didn't you question, what the book said? So after all of this, Stephen goes home and burns all the evidence. He burns pictures. He burns old pictures of him and Nancy. He burns Nancy's cardigan. He burns his wedding ring, which I thought was interesting. It seems like he is just like wants to kind of get rid of this whole life. So the narrator says, the narrator being Catherine, says that Stephen knew that Nancy dressed Joinathan up and ignored all the clues that should have told him what Jonathan's true nature was. And so I think Stephen is feeling guilty about this because he knew that Nancy was doing this and he kind of like accepted it and allowed it to happen. But then when he's burning the pictures, he sees a picture, one of the explicit pictures has Nicholas in the mirror. He sees a Nicholas in the mirror. So maybe Nicholas did see this incident, even though he says he didn't remember. Maybe he did see it, and maybe this is one of the reasons why he developed this like distance from his mother, because he saw this assault at a young age, couldn't process it, couldn't talk to his mother about it. Maybe. We don't really know, but we do see that Nicholas was in one of the pictures. So it seems like Nicholas might have had some recollection. Now, later, Robert and Catherine are talking, and Robert is apologizing to Catherine, asking for her forgiveness. And she says she's not sure if she can because essentially Robert, instantly believed the story. He like threw Catherine out. He didn't even hear her side. Now, she says that she tried to explain it. I don't remember her trying to explain the story. It's not great that Robert like instantly jumped on the book, but he had the book, he had the pictures. It was a, logical-ish, or at least it was a story that made sense. And I don't remember Catherine giving any counter evidence. But Catherine then says essentially that Robert, was more relieved, easier to accept. He was almost happier to hear that she was actually raped and not that she had an affair with this kid, which is true. Like that's kind of what happened. But she says that she can't forgive him for that. So this drives a wedge in them. A little bit later, we get an update that Robert and her finalize a divorce, and Catherine's future is uncertain, but she's focusing on Nicholas now. It looks like Nicholas lost some of the memories when they're talking. He says, like, I don't remember now. I don't know. We don't get any context, so we don't know if this means he doesn't remember the Italy trip. Like maybe she's telling him what happened on the Italy trip, and he's saying, like, I don't remember, like, I'm sorry. Or this could be that he lost some of the memories of what happened recently, like the, incident with Stephen, what happened before he overdosed. We don't know. We don't know where that memory loss was. But it does seem like Catherine and him are working on the relationship. They seem closer. They embrace and they end, the series by telling each other they love them. So that is the end of Disclaimer. Like I said, it's a phenomenal ending. It's a really like well done, dramatic ending. I didn't love the ultimate end, partly just because it seems a little bit too clean. Like the Nicholas love switched so dramatically for I'm not sure what the reason was, because like he hated his mother because she was pushing him out. She was pushing him out. He used his father, but it did seem like he and his father got along. And then all of a sudden, once they were living together, Nicholas started hating his father and then got to the point where he didn't even want to like hold his hand, even though his father seemed to be supportive, seemed to be nice. Like, yeah, he was awkward, he was weird, but like he was at least being supportive. And he so quickly moved to his mother and like meeting his mother, which is not what Nicholas was like before. Now, I don't know where that switch came from. It did make a very nice, feel good, happy, bright ending, right? Like the entirety of this series, except for like a lot of the Italy scenes, is fairly dark, fairly overcast. While the very last bit of this series, when Catherine's in her new home, she has her new life, she's with Nicholas, is like bright. There's a lot of white tile in there. It is a very different character than the rest of the series. So it did make for a very happy, very uplifting ending, that Catherine is starting her new life and she is focusing on herself and her son, and they're rekindling their relationship. But the shift in Nicholas's priorities, his love, felt a little manufactured. Like it went from essentially hating his mother, loving his dad, to just like the polar opposite, hating his dad, needing his mother, especially when he woke up. I mean, maybe that's natural. Maybe a kid, when they wake up, wants their mother just from pure instinct. But it did feel like a weird shift to me. And also, I still don't know why Joinathan went out to save Nicholas. That was weird. Like after he brutalized his mom, after he like traumatized her, he went out to save Nicholas. It could be he wanted to redeem himself. It could be that he did have some like strange perception of what his and Catherine's relationship was. That's why he said that was nice at the end. But that did feel very strange. Like the relationship one, I understand why he would run out to get Nicholas. The assault and rape one, I don't understand why he would run out to get Nicholas. It happened, I guess, and that is kind of how the story developed. But that was another aspect that wasn't really explained well. But overall, look, I love the series. The cast is fantastic. Really, really interesting storytelling. Really good kind of like ups and downs. Really great use of perspective that I like. So I think this is a good, really good series. One of the best series. It's one of the best series I've seen on Apple TV Plus. I definitely think you should check it out. So if you do watch it, let me know what you think. Let me know what you liked and didn't like. I'd love to hear it. And thanks so much for watching. If you like this review, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.